Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. I'm finally in a new location. I know the background's a little bit funny, but I didn't really find so much of a better place. I could have theoretically done it in the other room. Let's be honest, I could have done it in the other room. But I didn't really want it because people are like kind of sleeping here, you know? So I didn't want to do it in the other room. So I'm just doing it in this room. But yeah, it's true. There is a bathtub behind me. Anyways, but I'm so happy to be out of that other location. I mean, Jeff is an amazing guy and it was a great place, and I love Jeff and really fortunate and thankful to him for allowing me a place to stay for like half a year. But wow, I did not expect to be in that place for a half a year. Oh my goodness, I thought maybe like a few weeks, a month. Half a year, man. I mean, all this Corona stuff. But now I'm on the move again, and it feels amazing to be on the move. Yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing. Right now, I'm back. This is right now my parents' apartment here in Jerusalem. They live in New Jersey, but they have a place here. My brother and sister-in-law live there. I lived here for about like 6 years, and then, yeah, and then, I don't know, I just kind of shook things up. Brother and sister-in-law have been living here. I found a sublet for 6 months. But I don't know. It looks like I'm going back to the States now for a little bit. I don't know. I don't know. What do you want me to tell you? I just don't know. But Al Kopanim, I'm here now. Enjoy the background and enjoy the shir. So, Chaver, today we're learning Daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Ayruvin. And so the Daf begins, we continue talking about an Ayruv in a closet where the key is lost. We're going to see the opinion of Rabba and Rav Yosef, the opinion of Abaye and Rava, and then basically that'll more or less take us through Amud Aleph, and then Amud Beis, really, if I had to sum it up, really talks about the opinion of Rabbi Meir regarding safek tumah. So I think that is really the core discussion of Lamed Hey, which is interesting because we already learned Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Ayruvin, where we said that even though Rabbi Meir was the greatest of his generation, we are unable to paskin halacha like him because he can convince you that something tameh is tar and that something tar is tameh. So interesting that we're actually seeing his opinions when it comes to tumah. Okay, so our Mishnah had a machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer about how to deal with this like closet that has a Ayruv in there, but you lost the key. So Tanna Kama says it's okay, right? Ayruvo Ayruv. Hareza Ayruv. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer said, look, you know, if you do not know that you have access to the key, well then it's not a good Ayruv. So the question is, what exactly is the machlokas between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer? So so I'm on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines into the page. Rabba Rav Yosef Damar Tarvayu. The Rabba and Rav Yosef say, here we are talking about a closet that is made out of wood. Alright. Marsavar kliu, vein binim bekelim, vein stira bekelim, umarsavar oel hu. So the machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer is, how do you view this thing, this closet thing that the Ayruv is in? Do you view it as a kli? Right? If you do view it as a kli, and as a kli, but we learned in Masechta Shabbos that at least I think it was machlokas, but ein binim bekelim vein stira bekelim, right? That we're gonna then assume that you cannot. There's no binyan, there's no boneh when it comes to kelim, and there's also no dismantling when it comes to kelim, when it comes to vessels. And therefore, if we could say, therefore the Tanna Kama is going to argue that this closet is a kli, and as a kli, you'd be able to kind of break it open and take out your Ayruv, and therefore it's a kosher Ayruv, because ain't stira bekelim, there's no dismantling when it comes to vessels. Umar Savar, whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds, Ohelhu, it is not a kli, it is an ohel. And because it is an ohel, therefore, if you were to, break it and take out the Ayruv, well, then you would be breaking an ohel, and that would be a problem. And therefore, it is not going to be a kosher Ayruv, according to Rabbi Eliezer. We've looked at Tani Tanai, and it's like the same machlokas Tanaim that we see elsewhere. Ditnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Hakish, I guess, Hakish, let's say that. Hakish agabe shida teva umigdal. Great, Tmein. So funny. This is a Mishnah in Zavin. Now, in general, I feel like my perspective would be like, oh great, this is going to be complicated. Mishnah in Zavin. Now it's like, oh wow, amazing. I'm so happy it's not like tfachim and trees and Dalit Amos and all that stuff. It's like, oh, Zavin, I could do this. Tumentara, no problem. Okay. Oh my gosh. Anyways, so I guess learning Masechta Ayruvin just kind of makes everything else easier. Anyways, so great. So back to like this walk in the park Zavin stuff. So it's not. We have a Mishnah. Hekish agabe shida teva migdal. So you have a zav, and a zav, of course, is an av ha tuma, right? Now, one of the characteristics of a zav is, well, obviously, if he touches something, so it's going to become tameh, tumas maga. But over here, what he's not doing, he's not actually touching it; he's moving it. So let's say he just takes like a wooden beam or something, and it's pshute kle'etz, and so by touching it, it does not become tameh. But then he takes this like pole or whatever, and he uses it to move some kind of object. So that's what's called tumas heset, right? He moves something, and now it becomes tameh. So if you have our zav friend, and he moves a agabe teva shida umigdal, so shida teva umigdal, so he basically moves some kind of like these closet things. So Tanakama says that this shida teva umigdal is going to be tameh, whereas Rabbi Shimon mitayrin, whereas Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Shimon say that this shida teva umigdal remains tahor. So my love, so Rabbi and Rav Yosef want to argue, how do we explain this Mishnah? They're arguing about the following. Marsavar kliu, marsavar oelu. Let's say that the Tanakama views this shida teva umigdal as a kli. And since it is a kli, so obviously kalim can become tameh, and the zav will be mitameh. Whereas Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Shimon hold that the shida teva umigdal is in ohel, and as in ohel, it will not be susceptible to tumas heset. So Rabbi and Rav Yosef want to argue that the machlokas by a zav who moves the shida teva umigdal, and Tanakama says that it's tameh, and Rabbi Shimon / Rabbi Nechemia say that it's tahor. Rabbi and Rav Yosef want to argue that it's because the Tanakama views shida teva umigdal as a kli, and Rabbi Shimon / Rabbi Nechemia view the shida teva umigdal as an ohel. And therefore, just like they have those differing perspectives regarding shida teva umigdal over there by the zav, so we can make the same argument over here that in the context of Ayruv, the nafkamina between Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer is that the Tanakama views this, what did we call it? We called it a migdal, right? This migdal as a, although there is a letter, does he? No, he doesn't say anything. Treats this migdal as a kli, and therefore in binyan vein stira b'kelim, and therefore it's a kosher eruv. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer views it as an ohel, and therefore you would not be able to dismantle it, and it would not be a good eruv if you don't have the key. Fine. Amar Abaye says, Rabbi and Rav Yosef, you cannot make the argument. You cannot successfully make the argument that this Mishnah by Zavin is talking about the machlokas between the Tanakama on the one hand and Reb Shimon and Rabbi Nechemia on the other centers upon the question of, do we view a shida teva migdal as an oel or as a kli? No. Everybody, okay, let's just go right there for a second. So Amar Abaye, says, V'tizbara, do you really think that the machlokas between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon / Rabbi Nechemia is about whether we view a shida teva migdal as a kli or as an oel? Ve'atanya, we learn in a brayso, oel v'nisei tamei kli ve'enu nisei tar. If you have this zav fellow and he is interacting with an oel or a kli, so we say oel v'nisei tamei. If he moves even in ohel, it would be tamei. Kli ve'eno nisei tahor. If he, interacts with a kli, remember, if he touches it, it'll become tamei, but he's not touching it. Let's say he takes this stick and he tries to move it, and it doesn't move. So it will be tahor. So what do we see? So we see that even when it comes to an ohel, if our zav friend moves it, it will be tamei. And therefore, Reb Shimon and Rabbi Nechemia, Misama, when they say that it is tahor, it's not, right, when the zav moves it, it's tahor, it's not because it's an ohel. It's going to have to be for some other reason. V'katani seifa, and additionally, in that Mishnah, where we have the machlokas between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon / Reb Nechemia, the seifa of that Mishnah says, V'imhayu nisotin tmein, that if they would be moved, then it would be tamei. Even Reb Shimon and Reb Nechemia would agree that if this thing would be moved, if the zav would mamish move it, it would be tamei. So we have to exactly understand then what is that Mishnah talking about? What is the machlokes between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon / Reb Nechemia? Because weren't we after all talking about when you have a zav who moves something? So then why are they saying that if he moves it, then it'll be tamei? Didn't they say that it's tar? So let's see. Zeh klal continues that Mishnah. This is the rule. Niseit machmas kocho tamei. If this object got moved because of the koach of the zav, then it's tamei. Let's go on for a second. Machmas re'ada tahor, and if it's moved because out of like re'ada, trembling or whatever, then it's tahor. What does this mean? So everyone agrees. Everyone, Tanakama, Reb Shimon, Reb Nechemia, everyone agrees that if a zav were to take some kind of wooden stick that's pshutei kleitz and is not tamei, and then he will push some kind of object, that's going to be tamei. There's no doubt about that. Reb Shimon and Reb Nechemia agree. Now, everyone also agrees that if the zav would kind of go up to some item and stamp on the floor, and this is what re'ada is, that he would like stamp on the floor so powerfully that the object would move, like mamish move away like an inch or whatever, like move. So then, in that case, everyone also agrees that would be tahor, that would not be considered tumas hesed, right? Because he's not directly moving the object. Even the Tanakama would say that's tahor. Ella Amar Abaye, rather says Abaye, D'chuli ama hesed machmas kocho tame machmas re'ada tahor, v'acha b're'ada machmas kocho eskinon. Rather, the machlokas between the Tanakama on the one hand and Reb Shimon and Rabbi Nechemia on the other is, how do you deal with re'ada machmas kocho? What happens if you stamp on the floor and it kind of shakes the object, but it doesn't actually like move over like an inch or whatever? It kind of moves, but doesn't actually end up in a different location afterwards. So is that considered hesed or not? That the Tanakama says yes, it would be considered hesed and it's tamei. And Reb Shimon / Reb Nechemia say it's not considered hesed and therefore it's tahor. So that's machlokes between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon / Reb Nechemia about when a zav stamps on the floor and kind of moves this object, but at the end of the day it didn't actually go anywhere. So that's what the machlokas is. But it's certainly not a machlokas about if we treat this shida table migdal as a ohel or as a kli, because Reb Shimon and Reb Nechemia would say even if it's an ohel, if it's moved, it's going to be tamei. So therefore, Abaye is questioning Rabbi and Rav Yosef and saying, don't say that the machlokas in our Mishnah is about, do you treat a shida table migdal as a kli or as an ohel, and it's like that other machlokas? No. Okay, so if our Mishnah is not about whether it's an ohel or a kli, well then what is it about? So then what is the machlokas in our Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer? So Abaye v'Rav Adama Tarvayu, that Abaye and Rav both say b'minol v'kater b'misna askinan u'va'isakina lemifsekei. So rather, Abaye and Rava both say that our Mishnah, the machlokas in our Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer, is talking about where you have this closet and it is basically locked with a rope. You tied it up with a rope and secured it closed that way. And the thing is, the only way to open this closet would be with a knife. So you basically have to take a knife to open up the rope so you can get your Ayruv. Okay. So now Tanakama Savarla Rabbi Yossi. So Tanakama holds like Rabbi Yossi, the Amar. Kol HaKelim Nitalim B'Shabbos Chutz Mimeser Agadol V'Yoset Sham Achreisha. Whereas the Tanakama holds that, like Rabbi Yossi, that on Shabbos you can move any kli as long as it's not like a big saw or the coulter of a plow. Remember the coulter of a plow? And therefore, so you have this closet. The closet is tied with a rope. And you need a knife in order to cut free the rope and take out the Ayruv. So, according to Tanakama, it's no problem. He holds like Rabbi Yossi, that there's no problem with muksa over here. Take the knife, and you can open up the closet in order to extract the Ayruv. Rabbi Eliezer Savla Rabbi Nechemia, whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Nechemia, Damar afilu talis afilu tarvad and intalan el tzorach tashmishan, who says that even a talis, even a a shawl or even a spoon, you can only move it for its own purpose, right? So therefore, this knife is for cutting food and things like that, and you can't move this knife in order to open up to cut the rope so you can extract your Ayruv. And because you cannot move the knife to open up the rope to extract your Ayruv, therefore it is not a good Ayruv. So apparently Tosfos, so it looks like Tosfos asked the kasha though, which as I was just saying this, I was thinking like, but if it's a question of like how we refer to miksa, isn't muksa only midrabanan, and therefore at the time that he was kona shvisa at Hayrav Shemesh, kilo at Ben Hashmashos, it was only midrabanan and ain't shvus if we assume like Rebbe. So I think, yeah, so I don't know. So Tosfos has Hakasha apparently. I think maybe he says that it's like not like Rebbe, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. Tosfos has Hakasha. It's an interesting question. Okay. Anyways, Chavra, let's move on to the next Mishnah. Nisgalgo chutz l'tchum. So what if the Ayruv kind of moved outside of the Tchum Shabbos? Which I guess kind of makes sense, meaning you are putting your Ayruv kind of at the edge of the Tchum Shabbos, right? So that you can go as far as you can. And let's say it somehow rolled out of the Tchum Shabbos. So now it's a little bit too far away. So nafal alav gal, or what if a mound of like stuff fell on it and you cannot extract it? Oh, nisraf, or what if it got burnt? Truma, vinitmes, what if it was truma and it became tameh? So miba odiom, if any of these things happen, like before Shabbos begins, well, then eno Ayruv, it's certainly not going to be an Ayruv, because when Ben Hashmash was kicked in, you didn't have an Ayruv. Mishachashech arez Ayruv, and if it happens after Shabbos begins, right, after nightfall, after like it's mamish Shabbos, well then certainly it is an Ayruv, because when Ben Hashmashos kicked in, it was still like good. So, im yesh safek, but what if it's a safek? What if we don't know, when exactly this unfortunate predicament befell our Ayruv? So, Meir of Rabbi Yehuda Omim Areza Chamar V'Gamal. It's hilarious. So, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say, well, this is the case of somebody who is trying to escort both a camel and a donkey at the same time. Basically, you're going to be stuck in the middle, right? Because the donkey is going to want to move forward and the camel is going to want to move backwards, and you're going to be stuck between them. So basically, the same thing happens over here, right? Because we're not sure what the fate of our Ayruv was when Ben Hashmash was kicked in, so you're basically stuck in the middle. And what this means is that, well, because if, let's say, you're if like the Ayruv, if let's say the Ayruv worked, well, then you're able to keep on going past the Ayruv 2,000 amos, but then wherever your house was in the other direction, 2,000 amos, you wouldn't be able to go, right? That would be basically the extent of the Ayruv. Now, if the Ayruv didn't work, in which case you were like at your house when Shabbos started, in which case you'll be able to go like only up to where the Ayruv is, but not past there. So basically, the only thing that we know for sure is that the distance between your house and the Ayruv, you're going to be allowed to walk. But we have, since we're besafek, if it's considered that you're in your house, or if it's considered that you're by your Ayruv, therefore you're not allowed to walk past your house, and you're also not allowed to walk past the Ayruv. All you're allowed to walk in now at this point is this middle area that we know for sure you can walk in, almost like the imagery of a person trying to lead a camel and a donkey who are determined to walk in opposite directions, and you're basically stuck in the middle. Okay, very nice. I like that the Mishnah expressed this with that interesting imagery. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon omrim safek Ayruv kosher, whereas Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say that a safek Ayruv, such as this, will be a kosher Ayruv. Rabbi Yossi, Avtumus heid mishum chamisha zikenim al safek Ayruv shekosher. Says Rabbi Yossi that Avtumus testified from 5 elders. Who is this Avtumus, and who are these 5 elders? I wonder. Al safek Ayruv shekosher, that a safek Ayruv is kosher. Very interesting. Okay. Let's go weiter. Nisgago chutz l'tchum, says the Gemara, that when the Mishnah says that if our Ayruv somehow goes outside of the Tchum Shabbos, so now it's kind of a problem because it's too far away. You put your Ayruv too far away. You have to put it within 2,000 amas. So says Rava that when this Ayruv gets too far away, it's only if it gets more than 4 amos away from 2,000 amos, right? As we learned the other day, Rava's opinion is that wherever your Ayruv is, it kind of creates this like somewhat Rishus HaYachid kind of area, at least in the context of the Ayruv, that for 4 amos surrounding it. And therefore, if the Ayruv gets out of the Tchum Shabbos, but it's still within 4 amos, well, it's still within 4 amos of where you kind of put the Ayruv, so it's still like within its own area, and that's fine. Outside of that, however, would be too far. Fine. Nafal olav gal v'chulei. If a mound fell upon your Ayruv, and now you cannot access it, so it is going to be a non-acceptable Ayruv, assuming that the Divrei HaKol, assuming that it happened before Shabbos begins. So kos agadaitech the ibai matzi shakilei. So now, right now, the Gemara is saying that we're assuming that it doesn't mean that this is a pile that was like mamish, heavy stuff fell on it, that you will be unable to extract your Ayruv without the use of like proper tooling. No, right now we're assuming that it means that like some stuff fell over your Ayruv. You can't access your Ayruv because the stuff is muktzah, but theoretically, like you can physically move it. So they must nisan lo Rebbe. Well, then that would sound like our Mishnah is not like Rebbe's opinion. What does Rebbe say? Rebbe says that, right, that anything that's shvus, such as muktzah, such as, moving away a pile off of an Ayruv, well, no big deal, because, it's not an issue during Ben Hashmashos to move these things away, and it would be a good Ayruv. Now, if our Mishnah is saying that, like, a few things fell on our Ayruv and created a little mound that theoretically you could move away, but it's muktzah, and we're saying that that's a problem, well, that would sound like it's not like Rebbe. Right? That anything that's a shvus is no problem during Ben Hashmashos. So this would be an acceptable Ayruv. So the Gemara answers, Afilu Tema Rebbe. You can even say that our Mishnah is Rebbe, because lo tzricha debai mara v'chatzina. And what our Mishnah is talking about, it's not talking about where like a few little things fell on it that you can move away. And the only issue is muktzah. No, this is talking about where heavy stuff fell on it, and the only way to remove it would be to bring tools and really get in there, and that would be actually also midoraisa, and therefore it would be malacha, and therefore even during Ben Hashmashos it would be a problem, and that is why it would be a non-kosher Ayruv if this mound fell upon the Ayruv. Fine. Now the Gemara says, we need both cases. We need the case of the mound that falls on the Ayruv, and we need the case of when it falls outside of the Tchum, because the Itana Nisgalgo, if we only taught the case of the Ayruv that gets too far away from the Tchum, well then Mishum Delei Sagabe, I'll argue that the reason why it is a problem is because it's outside of the Tchum Shabbos. It's too far away. It's not with you. But if simply a mound fell upon the Ayruv, that it's still with us, it's still right in front of us, it's just covered up. So I might think that could be an acceptable Ayruv. So therefore I had to teach that when the Ayruv gets covered with a mound, it is not an acceptable Ayruv. Vitana, nafal, olav, gal, and if we only had the case of the mound that fell on it, mishum demichse, that's because it's covered up and you can't actually see it. Havanas gago, but if you can't see it and also it can't escape. Right, nisgago, but in the case where the Ayruv kind of got outside of the Tchum Shabbos, well, zimnin da asi zika umaisile. Well, maybe a wind can blow it back in. So I could think that maybe it's a good Ayruv. Tzricha, that's why we need both cases to say that in the case of when the Ayruv gets covered by a mound, as well as in the case where it gets blown outside of the Tchum Shabbos, in both cases, this would not be an acceptable Ayruv. Okay, the Mishnah said, O Nisraf Truma V'nitmes, right? The Mishnah continued that there were two other examples. One of them is if the Ayruv, the food got completely burned. The other case is if it was Truma and it became Tameh. So if it's Tameh, then you can't eat it. Now, Lamali, how come I need both cases? Well, Tana Nisraf, the Mishnah taught about when it gets completely incinerated, to teach the extreme position of Rabbi Yossi, that he says that when you have a safek, whether or not I guess you show up the next day, and your Ayruv is completely incinerated, and we don't know when this happened. Maybe it happened during Bein Hashmashos. Rabbi Yossi would nonetheless say that it's a kosher Ayruv, even though it's completely incinerated. And Tana Truma V'nitmes L'odecha Kochot Reb Meir, and the Mishnah taught the example of Truma that became Tameh, right? And I don't know, somehow I guess we know that it became Tameh. We don't know when it happened. Maybe it happened during Bein Hashmashos. That even though we initially had a chazaka that this Truma was kosher, was tahor, right? Why not? At the time that you put the Truma there, it was tahor. And so you can make the argument that establish it on its chazaka. We know that it was tahor in advance, so we can assume that it continued to be tahor during Bein Hashmashos, or at least at the beginning of Bein Hashmashos, when the Ayruv kicked in. And therefore, I can make the argument that if it's a safek by Truma, that we should say that it's a kosher Ayruv. But nonetheless, it shows you the extreme position of Rabbi Meir, that this safek Truma Shenitmes, he's going to say that it is a non-kosher Ayruv. Does Rabbi Meir really hold that when you have a safek tuma, we're going to go le chumra? We learn in a Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah? Mikvahos, okay? Makes sense. Tameh shiyar litbol, if you have somebody who's tameh and he went to the mikvah. Safek taval, safek lo taval, we don't know if he actually went to the mikvah or not. Ve'afilu taval, maybe even if he went to the mikvah, safek taval by ba'im sa. Maybe he went maybe it was 40 sa in the mikvah, maybe it wasn't. Safek lo taval by ba'im sa. V'chein shnei mikvahos, ba'achas eish ba'arba'im sa, ba'achas ein ba'arba'im sa, v'taval ba'achas me'en, v'eni odeh be'ezeh me'en taval, sveko tameh. Also, if there was two mikvahs over there, one of them has 40 sa, one of them doesn't have 40 sa, and we're not sure which one he went in. Basically, we have some guy needed to go to the mikvah, and we're not sure that he actually either he went to the mikvah, or even if he did go to the mikvah, maybe it wasn't 40 sa. So basically, it's a safek, and we say that he is tameh. Okay. Now, but says the Mishnah, when do we say this? B'tumah chamura. That's only by tumah chamura, tumah deoraisas. For example, I don't know, somebody touched a mace or something, or that. Well, I guess that's kind of extreme. Somebody even, I don't know, he shook hands with the zav, and now he's tameh. I think he has to go to the mikvah. So Mr. Tameh has to go to the mikvah. So b'tumah chamura. But if it's tumah kala, kigon, for example, shachol ochlin tmein. For example, he ate tameh food. Now, food is generally not matame. If you eat tameh food, it's generally not matame a person. First of all, ochel, let's say if it's a sheni or whatever, so sheni is not matame adam. But also, eating food is not matame a person. The only food that is matame a person is if you eat bird meat, is matame ofus, I believe, or matame beves abliya, when you swallow them. Anyways, but apparently we learned at the beginning of Masechta Shabbos, in all that complicated Tumah and Tara stuff, that if you eat a chatzi pras, 2 eggs worth of food, it came up the other day, if you eat 2 eggs worth of food, so then I guess your tummy tumah midirabanan, at least that we said that you're not allowed to eat truma if you're a kohen. Or you drank tamei mashke, or if your head and most of your body gets into mayim shuvin, just like drawn water. Oshinaflu al rosho Varubo shlosh lugim mayim shuvin, or if on his head and most of his body 3 logs worth of mayim shuvin falls. Okay. V'yarad litbo, meaning, so this is talking about like tumat derabanan. Now in this case, the same exact thing happens. V'yarad litbo, he went to the mikvah, safek taval, safek lo taval, maybe he went to the mikvah, maybe he didn't. Vafilu taval, safek taval ba'bayim sa, safek lo taval ba'bayim sa, maybe he went to the mikvah in 40 sa, maybe he didn't go to the mikvah in 40 sa. V'chein, similarly, shnei mikvahos, ba'achas yesh ba'arbayim sa, ba'achas ein ba'arbayim sa, v'taval ba'achas man, ve'en hudeh be'ez man taval, right? And then you have 2 mikvahs, one of them has 40 sa, one of them doesn't, we don't know which one he went in. So, sfeko tahor. In this case, his safek is going to be tahor. So, and Rabbi Yossi mitami. Rabbi Yossi says that even in this case, by the tumat derabanan, by the safek would be tameh. So, 2 interesting things. So, first of all, Rabbi Meir is making a distinction between tumat deoraisa and tumat derabanan. He said that when you have a safek tumat deoraisa, tumat chamura, so he says that your sfeko is tameh. When it comes to safek of tumat derabanan, so we say sfeko is tahor. Now, Ayruv, the assumption is midirabanan. Ayruvin are midirabanan. So right, meaning making the Ayruv tchumen, so you can extend your tchum Shabbos is, or at least redefine where you are for Shabbos, so that redefine the boundaries of your tchum Shabbos. So that is midirabanan, and therefore, if we have a safek of tuma by this truma in the context of Ayruvin, of Ayruv tchumen, mistama, it should be tahor. So why is Reb Meir saying that this truma tmeya, when we have a safek, it is going to be, we have to treat it as if it's tameh when bein hashmashos happen and it's a pasul Ayruv. And so that's really our main question, and that's interesting thing number 1. Interesting thing number 2 is that Rabbi Yossi is saying that it is tameh, yet in our Mishnah he seems to not have a problem with this truma tmeya, right? Okay. Anyways, this safek truma tmeya. So the Gemara answers Kasav Rabbi Meir tchumen deoraisa ninu. So the Gemara answers, well, Rabbi Meir actually holds like I believe like Rabbi Akiva, right? Wasn't Rabbi Akiva always said that tchumen? I believe, right? Rabbi Akiva said that Tchum Shabbos is midoraisa. So I guess Rabbi Meir, which makes sense because Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Meir's teacher, right? Right? We learned on Daf Yud Gimel that Rabbi Meir was a student of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. So anyway, so Rabbi Meir holds that Tchumen are midoraisa, and therefore a safek of Truma in the context of Tchum Shabbos, we're going to go to Chumrah. Great, consistent, no problem. But 1 second. V'sav Reb Meir tchumen deoraisa? Does Reb Meir really hold that tchum Shabbos is midoraisa? V'hatnan. We learn in the Mishnah. Im ein yochol avlio bazo amr Reb Dostai bar Yanai mishum Reb Meir shamaiti shemekadrin v'harim. This is interesting. So basically, when you're measuring tchum Shabbos, what you do is you take this rope. But we're going to get to this, I think, in a few weeks from now, apparently. So I don't know all the information over here. But on the surface of things, basically, you would measure Tchum Shabbos, you would measure the distance with a rope that is 50 amos long, okay? Friends, what happens when you get to a mountain or when you get to a valley? So basically you don't have, the problem here is that, well, it increases the slope, right? If we take into account the incline and the decline of the mountain or the kind of, whatever, down and up of the valley, well, then you're going to be able to go much less far because, obviously the up and down is going to be taken away from your 2,000 amas. So what we say is that in those cases, what you do is actually, the valley, you just take the rope and you just extend it from one end of the valley to the other, and i.e. you just treat it as if it was flat. You don't have to go down and up. And the same thing for a mountain, right? What you would do is you would kind of hold it over the mountain or this hill, and again, you would just treat it as a straight line and count it that way. You don't have to use the incline and decline of the mountain and the valley. However, but what if the mountain was larger than 50 amos? The hill was larger than 50 amos, so the slope, like the decline thing was larger than 50 amos, and you can't. It's too big to get the rope from one side to the other. The rope is too short. So in that case, right? So So says Rabbi Dostai Bar Yana in the name of Rabbi Meir, Shamati shemikadrin beharim. That Rabbi Meir said that I heard that you can actually like pierce a hole through the mountains. Okay, so honestly, I'm not super clear on what exactly that means, but the point is that it is some kind of a kula, right? That when it comes to measuring this mountain, so you can kind of treat it as though it was like there was like a tunnel over there. Now, here's the question. Now, if Rabbi Meir really held that tchumen are midoraisa, well then would he really say that you can just treat it as if there's like a tunnel going through this mountain? Amr of Nachman, Amr Rabbi Bar Avua, ein mikadrin, that we can't, if there's a hill, you cannot just treat it as if there's a tunnel going through the hill or the mountain, lo ba'ari miklat, not by an ir miklat, when you have to measure the distance, right, the tchum surrounding the ir miklat. So, because I think the point is that the ir miklat is already collate, it already accepts people with it once you get into the tchum, right? In ir miklat, of course, if somebody kills somebody by accident, so he runs to this ir miklat and he stays there until the Kohen Gadol dies, and that protects him from the relatives of the person who was killed by accident. They are what's called the goel adam. They are avenging the death of their relative, so they can kill this fellow who killed their relative by accident. So if you kill somebody by accident, you got to run real fast to the ir miklat. Now once you get to within 2,000 amos of the ir miklat, so then you're safe. So we say that when it comes to measuring the 2,000 amos of an ir miklat, we do not view like any tunnels. Like we'd have to actually take into account the inclines and declines, even if that's going to make the tchum shorter. Vilo be'egla arufa. Also, if what's an egla arufa? Somebody dies, you just kind of you find a corpse in the middle of nowhere, and we don't know who killed him. So then what we do is we find the closest city, and the elders of that city then like kill an egla arufa and that whole thing. So when you're measuring that, also we do not view any tunnels. You have to take into account the inclines and declines because they are midoraisa. No, so. On the one hand, we were arguing that Rabbi Meir says that Ayruvin is midoraisa, and because it's midoraisa, the safek is going to be l'chumra. Yet on the other hand, who's this? Rabbi Dostai Bar Yana said the name of Rabbi Meir. That Rabbi Meir says that he heard that you're allowed to view it as if there's a tunnel going through this mountain or this hill. So, but if tchumen were midoraisa, he wouldn't say that, because after all, we don't say this hill idea, this tunnel idea, by egla arufa and by ir miklat, because they're midoraisa. So lakash idei hadidei adarabbi. So my answer is it's really not a big deal. Rabbi Meir holds that tchumen are midoraisa. So what about the whole tunnel thing? Well, exactly as Rabbi Dostai Rabbi Yanai said, that he was quoting Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir said that he heard that we don't pierce. That we heard that Rabbi Meir said that he heard that you can treat it as if there's a tunnel when it comes to tchum Shabbos. I.e., it's not his opinion. He heard that other people say that, but his opinion is that you would not be able to put a tunnel through it because it's midoraisa. Dekanami diktani bazo Amr Reb Dostai Bar Yana Mishum Reb Meir Shamati Shemakadrim Behem Shmamina. And exactly as I just said, that it just totally makes sense to say that the opinion of putting a tunnel through this mountain is not his; it's his teacher's opinion. Although I guess mistamanat Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva says that tchumen are midoraisa, so maybe it's Rabbi Shmuel, whatever it is. He heard from other people that you would be able to put a tunnel through because it's derabanan, but Rabbi Meir himself holds that it is deoraisa. So the Gemara says, "V'ami deoraisa adoraisa l'Rabbi Meir." But one second, but we seem to have an inconsistency in Rabbi Meir's opinion when it comes to safek tumat deoraisa. Let's see, what's the inconsistency? It's not, as we learned in the Mishnah, naga be'echad balayla. If Reuven touched Shimon at night, and at the time Reuven didn't know if Shimon was alive or not. And the next day they wake up and sure enough Shimon is dead. Now we're not concerned if Reuven killed Shimon. We're concerned is Reuven tameh. So Rabbi Meir Matar v'Chacham Mitamen shkal tmeos k'shas mitziyasan. So Meir says that Reuven is going to be tahor, and the Chacham say that Reuven is going to be tameh because all tmeos are based on how they're found, and therefore they woke up in the morning and Shimon was dead, so Reuven has to assume that he was dead at the time, that Shimon was dead at the time that Reuven touched him, and therefore Reuven is going to be tameh. Now, Reb Meir, however, says that Reuven is going to be tahor. Now, that's weird. Why does Reb Meir say that Reuven is going to be tahor? Well, because Shimon has a chazaka of being tahor, right? Shimon, who's now dead, but at the time they went to sleep at night, Shimon was alive. He was tahor. So he has a chazaka of being alive and being tahor. And therefore, Reb Meir is basically saying that we can, continue with that chazaka. We can rely upon the chazaka that Shimon was tahor and say that when Reuven touched Shimon, he was still alive. Well, shouldn't we say the same thing when it comes to truma? Well, this truma was tahor when you put it there, so it has a chazaka of being tahor. So why, when it comes to the Ayruv, is Reb Meir saying that even though there's a chazaka that the truma was tahor, we still have to assume that it's tameh, and it's a safek tuma, it's tameh, and therefore the Ayruv is no good. Yet when it comes to tumas hameis, Reb Meir is saying that you can rely upon the chazaka that Shimon was alive at the time, and say that Shimon was alive at the time that Reuven touched him at night, and therefore Reuven should be tahor. So what's the difference? So Amr B'Yirmiyah. So B'Yirmiyah says Mishnasenu shaya aleh sheretz kol ben hashmashos. Interesting. So B'Yirmiyah says that, well, our Mishnah isn't actually like a safek and chazaka and everything. No. According to B'Yirmiyah, actually there was a dead sheretz on this truma the entire ben hashmashos, in which case it's not really a safek anymore. It's really a vadai, which is a pretty weird answer. So basically this truma was definitely tameh. There's no safek here, there's no chazaka over here. It was, there was a sheretz on it the entire ben hashmashos. Now, but then the Gemara says, Yahachi, Lema Rabbi Yossi, safek Ayruv kasher. If that's the case, then, Rabbi Yossi argues on Reb Meir and says that, no, this is a safek truma, safek truma tmea, and it's kasher. What do you mean? There's no safek here. There's a dead sheretz on it the entire ben hashmashos. So that's a problematic answer. So Rabba Rav Yosef Damitarvayu. So Rabba and Rav Yosef now get into an interesting thing. Interesting. So Rabba and Rav Yosef say that the case in our Mishnah with the Truma Tmeya is actually talking about where there were two groups of witnesses that are actually testifying about this Truma Tmeya. One group of witnesses is saying that it became Tameh before Shabbos started, Mibod Yom, which, if that's the case, then it's not a good Ayruv. But the other group is testifying that the Truma became Tameh already on Shabbos, Mishachashecha, after it was certainly dark out, in which case it's a good Ayruv. Now, because we have these witnesses, and one group of witnesses is saying that it became Tameh already when it was daytime out, so Chazaka goes in the garbage. We no longer can say that we have a Chazaka, that we can assume that this Truma was Tahor, when Ben Hashmashos started. You can't say that anymore, because after all, you had a group of witnesses testifying that it was Tameh already before Shabbos started. So therefore, the Chazaka goes in the garbage. Therefore, it's just a situation of Safek Tuma Mida Oraisa, and therefore, Rebbe Meir says Safek Tuma Mida Oraisa is going to be Tameh. We have to go to Chumrah, as we saw in that Mishnah with the guy going to the mikvah. Fine. Rava Amar. Rava says, so Rava gives an interesting answer, and he says, Hasam trei chazaka lekula v'hacha chada chazaka lekula. This is interesting. So Rava now says you can even look at these two groups of witnesses in the context of the Reuven touching Shimon at night and then finds out that Shimon's dead the next day. So even in that case, right, so let's say the same exact case. Reuven touches Shimon at night, they wake up the next morning, Shimon's dead. So the question is Reuven tameh meis or not? So Rav is saying even if in that case there were two groups of witnesses, one group testifies that Shimon was dead at the time that Reuven touched him, the other one says that Shimon was alive at the time that Reuven touched him. In that case, we would still assume that Reuven is tahor. How come we would assume, or that Rav Meir would say that Reuven is tahor? The reason is because over there we have two things going on. Well, a few things going on, really. We have the chazaka of Shimon. Shimon had a chazaka that he was tahor, right? He was alive his entire life until now. So Shimon has a chazaka that he was alive and that he was therefore tahor. Now, we also, however, about Shimon, have these two groups of witnesses who are contradicting themselves, but certainly one of them is saying that he was already dead by the time that Reuven touched him. Okay, so regarding Shimon, we have on the one hand the chazaka that he was alive. On the other hand, we have witnesses saying that he was not alive at the time that Reuven touched him. But then we also have the chazaka of Reuven himself. Reuven himself is tahor. So therefore he is a chazaka, is alive, and therefore he has a chazaka of being tahor. So therefore, because we have two chazakas against the witnesses, so therefore we can assume that Reuven is tahor, according to Rabbi Meir is going to say that Reuven is tahor. However, when it comes to the truma tameya, well, now all you have is the chazaka that the truma was tahor at the time that you put it there, but you also have the witnesses saying that the truma, at least one group of them is saying that it was tameh already before Shabbos started. So therefore it's one chazaka, it's a chazaka against the witnesses, and one against one is just not going to be strong enough, and therefore we're going to have to go to Chumrah and say that the Ayruv is not kosher according to Rabbi Meir. However, it's a little bit subtle, but the difference between Rabba and Rav Yosef versus Rava is that chazaka null and void or not? Right? According to Rabba and Rav Yosef, they were saying that there were two sets of witnesses in the context of Truma, and because you have those witnesses, they actually are able to disqualify the chazaka. We no longer have a chazaka by the Truma, and therefore it's just safek Truma, and therefore we're going to have to go to Chumrah. According to Rava, it's slightly different, which is in the context of Truma, the chazaka, the groups of witnesses don't disqualify the chazaka. It's still there, it's one chazaka. It's the chazaka against the witnesses, and therefore, because it's essentially just one against one, the chazaka is not strong enough to win out. And I think that the nafkamina would be back in the case of, what would you say in the case of Reuven and Shimon when Shimon's dead? So Rava says, well, you have two chazakas against witnesses, right? You have the chazaka that Shimon was alive until now. We have the chazaka that Reuven is alive and tahor against the group of witnesses, so the two against one wins out. However, if you would apply this situation with the witnesses according to Rabban and Rav Yosef, so I guess Mistama, they would say, well, you no longer have the chazaka of Shimon because the witnesses disqualified that chazaka, like they say by Truma, but you do have the chazaka of Reuven that he's tahor, but it's only that chazaka against the witnesses, and maybe that wouldn't win out. So maybe that would be the nafkamina between Rabba and Rav Yosef on the one hand, and Rava on the other hand. The nafkamina could be what they would say in the case of Reuven and Shimon when Shimon dies, and then the two witnesses come and say, one says he was tameh at the time that Shimon was already dead at the time that Reuven touched him, and the other one say he was still alive. What would the result be there? Okay, Chavra, that was Daf Lamed Hey of Masechta Ayruvin. Let us do a recap. So we talked about an Ayruv in a closet with a lost key. So we had the opinion of Rabban of Yosef that said it's basically machlokas about, do you treat this closet as a kli or do you treat this closet as an ohel? Tanakam says we treat it as a kli and ain't stira bekelim, and therefore you can open up the closet to take out the Ayruv. Now Rabbi Eliezer says that we treat it as an ohel, and for that reason you cannot extract it. You cannot break the kli ohel. You cannot break this closet in order to get out the ohel. To get out the Ayruv. And therefore you would need the key. Abai and Rava say actually it's talking about a closet that was tied with a rope, and you would need a knife in order to undo the rope so that you can get out the Ayruv. And the question is, in terms of muktzah, Tanakama hold like Rabbi Yossi that it would not be muktzah and therefore it would be fine, whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Nechemia that it would be muktzah and you would be unable to use this knife to open the closet and get your Ayruv. Then we spent time talking about Rabbi Meir's opinion about safek tumah. We say that when it's midah oraisa, so then we have to go l'chumra and say that it's tameh. If it's midah abanan, so then we can go l'kula. Now, what happens even by the oraisas, but there's a chazaka that this should be tahor? Well, in that case, it will be tahor. But what happens when there's a chazaka versus witnesses? So Rabba and Rav Yosef would say, well, if it's just chazaka versus witnesses, well, the witnesses are going to undo the chazaka, and therefore you no longer have a chazaka. Whereas Rabba says, no, the chazaka still stands, just that it wouldn't be strong enough, And I believe that the nafkamina would be when there are two chazakas versus one, such as by the mace with Reuven and Shimon, that according to Rav, you would have two chazakas versus one, and we can assume that Reuven is tahor, whereas according to Rabbi and Rav Yosef, you would say that the chazaka of Shimon gets cancelled out. It would be just one chazaka of Reuven versus the witnesses by Shimon, and you'd have to assume that Reuven is tameh. Chava, have an awesome day. Peace.